Hello everybody! Welcome to another Maya rigging tutorial. Today though we're not doing a character, we are doing a vehicle rig. So today I'm going to show you how to set up a nice, very basic vehicle rig, looking at the idea of having doors and the doors being able to open, having tires that are going to rotate when you move the car. We're going to do some fun suspension things with the car to get it to bounce back and forth. But really this is going to be a nice basic tutorial on what you can do for a vehicle. Now granted, our vehicle is really cute and fun. If it looks familiar, you've probably seen the Aardman Chevron stop motion commercials before. That's what we had Jason model this cutie after. So this, what we're going to do, can really apply to any type of car. I'm not going to do anything on his actual little face controls. I'm going to do just basic car mechanics. So if you have a much more realistic car looking for a more realistic animation, that's alright. This tutorial will still work for you. Now with this tutorial, there's going to be absolutely no joints and no skinning. So if you hate skinning, congratulations, this one will be for you. But there are going to be some other things involved with the rig. It's going to be a lot of parenting. We're going to use a lot of constraints. And in this tutorial, we're going to use expressions. Again, expressions are a part of rigging in Maya. It's kind of an early level of scripting that we're going to be making a connection between two different items, but instead of just connecting it with a constraint, we're going to write out an expression that tells when one object moves and does something, it affects another object. So we will be using expressions. So I have all of my curves already in place just to speed the tutorial up. Again, in our previous tutorials we go over making curves, making controls and things. So I'll tell you where all the pivots and things are for them when we get to the controls, but I just didn't want to have to spend all that time making them. Again, as we've kind of seen in the other tutorials, your control rigs, the actual curve controls, can be anything that you want them to be. It's as fancy as a design as you need it to be. Everything could be circles and you'd be fine. So I just have them here to speed the process up for us. So in my outliner, what I currently have is one group that represents all of the geometry, and it is my car geo group, again standing for car geometry group. And then for the moment I have all of my curves that, again, we'll go through them, that are just separate. So if you're starting out from scratch, you should have one group that is the group of all of your geometry intact. So with our car, what we're going to first start with are the tires. And this, again, is really going to be based off what kind of model you are using. If your model of your tire, when you click on the tire geometry, if the whole tire is highlighted, including the hubcap, well then you're good. You don't need to group it. But if your tire, like mine, has a bunch of pieces to it, which more than likely it should, based on how this kind of model is made, we need to group all of the tires so that way you're going to be able to select one thing that represents the tire. So for mine, we have the actual tire tread geometry and then a hubcap with that kind of fits into part of the axle. So for each tire, they're all separate pieces, so we need to group them into one that represents each piece, each tire. Said that like 3 times. Okay, we're going to move on. So to start with, I'm going to select my front tire and its steering wheel, and just going to do Control G to group it. And I'm going to move my group to where that tire would actually be rotating from. A nice, really quick way to do it is I'm just going to throw on a center pivot. And then in the front view, since I know it centered it to it, it's just not in the proper actual alignment. I'm going to use my insert key to change the pivot to where the axle. I'll zoom in on that just so you can kind of get an idea. Again, so if you have a longer axle or anything, think of where the tire itself is rotating from as the group. That's where I'm placing my pivot. And then we're going to have 4 of these, so we do need to name them. So this group is, again, representing my tire. So this is my left front tire. Now I'm just going to use L and R, F and B, just the letters. You are more than welcome to actually type the things out. And I'm just going to repeat for the back. So I have left back tire, repeat on the other side, and then I'll change the pivots after. So group, that is right front tire, oops, and then the back group, right back tire, and then real quick I will just change their pivots. So throw on modify center pivot, and again, can't see it because it technically is behind some other geometry, but it is there. Grab my other one, modify center pivot, just this one, and slide over and get the other back one, modify center pivot. Again, I know it's back there, but there's geometry in the way, so it doesn't look highlighted. But it is. Okay, so we got our tires, we got our groups. They're all in place. So next thing would be to create your controls of what you're going to use to animate the tires. So again, that's why I have all these little circles already represented. And their pivot is at the exact same place as the pivot of the tire group. So again, if I kind of look from the front and I look at my tire group, the pivot is in the same place. And again, we're doing this in the same place because we're going to be using this control to rotate and move the tire. So again, you need to think of where does that tire actually move and rotate from. If you don't have an axle piece like this, well then actually put it inside the tire itself. You can use a pivot like that. But again, think of the mechanics of the actual car and what it's going to be doing. So you would need to create one control for all 4 tires, and then name it based off what tire it is, and that's a control. So for example, this is my left front tire control. And now we're going to connect them. And we are going to use constraints. Again, very similar things of what we've done in other places. Just again, making sure we've done this in all the other tutorials, but anytime you make a control, you've moved it into position, make sure you freeze your transformations. So your translate rotates are set back to 0, scale is set back to 1. Again, this is just under modify, freeze transformations. Make sure you always do that to a curve. So it cleans it out. Alright, so now we're going to do some constraints. So for the tire, for the constraining, again, you're in a constraint, you always select your control curve first. And then a lot of what we're going to be doing in this tutorial, I'm grabbing from the outliner because I need to grab the group of the tire, not the geometry, the group. So in my outliner, I'm going to control select my left front tire group. And I'm going to open up options for orient constraint. Now for the orient constraint, I want to make sure maintain offset is set on. Again, this is in case, based on the window that you originally create your curve, if the original orientation axis is offset, this way they won't jump on you. And I'm not going to do all axes. I'm going to do my Y and my Z. I'm leaving X off because X is what's actually going to be rotating the tire, and I'm going to apply that at the end to a different control. So again, for this of each tire, I'm going orient constraint of Y and Z only, and apply. So again, what visual I'm going to get is when I rotate it on the Y, my tire rotates. And again, it's rotating based on that pivot. I rotate on the Z. Again, the idea that this is a cartoony car, he might want to have his wheels do this. I've had, we had in class kind of say, you want to go hovercraft? Poof, I now have hovercraft tires. So the Z isn't really needed, but it's for fun. And again, I'm not putting on the X yet. I'm going to add that later. So I'm going to repeat this for my other tires, selecting the curve first, select the group, orient constraint. If you have not done anything before that, you can use G on your keyboard to repeat that command. So I don't have to keep going back up to there. So control curve, group, orient constraint, control curve, group, orient constraint. So now all my tires will have the ability to rotate. So I have rotation, but what if you want to move the tire? Again, the idea of the tire bouncing, the tire running over a curb or something. Again, the idea of a character car having the tire to have a little bit more flexible movement. So I'm going to do some point constraints next. Again, same selection order, selecting the curve, and select the group. And we're going to go to constrain and open the option box for point constraint. Again, working with maintain offset, but I'm not doing all 3 axes. In this case, I'm looking at just moving it up and down, which is my Y axis. Again, if you want to have more movement for your vehicle, for your tires, by all means add an X, that would move it forward and back. The Z would move it in and out. I'm just looking at a little bit of upward motion, so that's going to be my Y. And add it in. So now when I move that control curve, my tire will move up and down. So I'm going to repeat for my others. Again, control curve, control, select the group. And again, since I haven't done anything else, just hitting G to repeat my point constraint. Control curve, selecting group, G for point constraint, control curve, group, G for point constraint. So now they each have that extra little motion. So this gives us the ability to animate the tires individually. But let's say you were animating the car actually moving forward. If you had to select all four wheels at once and do them individually, that's a lot of work. That's a lot on your animator. Again, let's try to make it as easy as possible on the animator. So that's what these curves are that I have in the front of the car. And I have one again in the back of the car. That these are looking at to group the tires, to group the little wheel controls. So I don't have to select the front two ones on their own if I know they're both going to be rotating together. I can have a control that does it for me. So this is called my front tire control. The one in the back tire control. Great naming system, I know. So with this, based on pivot points, I'm putting the pivot along the axle that is centered between the two tires that I'm controlling. So again, being it centered back here, I'm looking at rotating those two tires, so this way that would be a pivot in between them. So to do the connection, this is just going to be a regular parent. I'm going to select the actual control for the tire and just shift select my front arrow control and P for parent. And then repeat for the other side. Shift select the main center one, P for parent. So again, visually what I'm going to get now, moving isn't really going to do that much, but I could use it to move the tires up and down. This is really much more for rotating. If I wanted to have my car go around a corner, I can rotate it and they'll go back and forth. Now again, this is something that later on you might want to set a limit on, because if I turn it too far, the geometry is going to cut into the car and my control cuts into my car as well. So think of that based on your hubcap, your tire wheel area and everything, that you might need a limit. Again, same for Z, but that's not really going to work very well since they're on opposite sides of the car. So just repeat this for the back. Select the tire control, shift select the main group one, P for parent. Opposite side tire control, main one, P parent, and now I can rotate. Now I've had this question too in class of, do back wheels actually do that? I'm not going to pretend I know anything about actual mechanics of cars, except for the fact that this guy is a cartoon character. He's not a real car. So I'm giving my animator the flexibility to actually do that to their tires if they want it. Doesn't mean that it has to happen, but it's here for them. So if you have a realistic car that your tires can't do that, well, don't add a control back here. Just leave them on their own. Alright, so that's our tires. Again, for now, we're going to add the rotation in, but we're going to add that a little bit later. But this right now, we have just a nice way to work with the tires. So next, doors. So I have a door control. Again, very simple curve. It's called left door control. Same idea on the opposite side. Right door control. Again, my car only has 2 doors that actually open. If I had more doors that open, I would have more controls. If your doors don't open, then don't worry about this. You can just sit and listen to this wonderful instruction. For the door controls, the pivot, you can kind of see where my pivot point is placed, is over here of where the door itself would actually open. Looking at the geometry of the door, of, again, if it was real, physics of how the door is going to open and close, that's where I'm putting the pivot of my actual curve. So when it is working, it's going to apply to the geometry and open the door. Now with this one, my side mirror, my little door handle, they are all just kind of, merged as one piece. If you did have multiple pieces that represented your door, I would group them or attach them all together and either apply it to the attached group or apply it to the group. Again, because you want the whole door to move with this motion. and it's going to be set up just like the tires. Then I'm doing a constraint to have this actually rotate the door open. So having my door control selected first, shift select the door, constrain, open the orient options. Again, always making maintain offset on just to help myself. And again, based on my car facing forward in the Z, I'm going to be using my Y rotation. So I only need to constrain my Y axis because that's the only way the door should actually move. So when I have that Y orient constraint applied, I can open my door. So I'm just going to repeat on the opposite side, select the door control, shift select the geometry, and again, since I haven't done anything, I can use G to repeat the orient constraint command, and now it will open and shut. Now this is another good instance where you might want to put limits on the curves of what it can actually do. Again, just thinking of the idea of, okay, Y going out opens my door. Just to make it easier on your animator, put a limit on it so when they rotate shut, it automatically stops at the closed position and doesn't keep going into the geometry. Just make it easier on the animator if it will, shut. And even on the opposite direction, that it can only open so far. Makes a nice little rig. So those are our doors. Doors are pretty simple. Again, if you had more doors, well, then make more controls. If you had a trunk or a hood that opened, I would do the exact same thing. Put a control there, do an orient constraint to open up that section. So doors are pretty simple. Alright, moving up on the vehicle. You can see above my car I have these 3 controls up here, 2 arrows and then 1 in the center. These I am using for suspension controls. The one in the middle is going to be the main suspension, moving the entire vehicle of the car. Again, looking at the idea that I have this geometry group of my car, I'm looking at having the car body itself actually have some animation to it. So these are going to be connected with the actual geometry, and this is actually going to be using expression. So for these 3 controls that I have, again, they can literally be anything. They're just represented as arrows as an idea of when I push it down, the car itself will look like it's being pushed down. The main one in the center, kind of looking at like the hood looks, really simple shape. So these are going to be connected to the geometry. So again, right now I have a geo group that has everything in it. I don't want everything because I don't want the tires involved in here. I want everything that represents the body of the car. So I'm going to select the remaining geometry. Again, everything else, car body, my doors are included. Again, my hubcap, my bumpers, my mirrors, again, any sort of decorative elements that you may have. And I'm going to group them all together. And this is just going to be my geometry, my car body. Car body would be a good one. So car, body, group. Alright, so how this is going to work. Again, the idea of this suspension is when I move this control, what we are going to be aiming for is that it moves the body of the car. So the body of the car is going to be moving. Again, think of an old rickety car. There they move. They're not still. When I move the arrow, it's going to be making the body of the car rotate down. And then same with the other one. So how this is working is that we're going to have 3 controls, which means we need to have 3 pivots. The main control is going to be connected to the just regular car body, nice and simple. But for the other 2, they're going to be based on pivots that we need to create that rocking motion. So for that group that I just made, that car body group, I actually didn't need to rename it because I'm going to be changing it in a second. But I'm selecting that group and I'm going to group it to itself. Just with it selected, I'm just doing Control G, which groups it to itself, and then I'm going to do it one more time. Control G again. So if I hadn't named it before, this would have said group 1, group 2, and group 3. So what these are going to be representing, again, are pivots for the car, and working on, again, faking out the suspension of the car, getting the car body to rock. So the bottom group, again, what is technically the 3rd group, the one that I had renamed that I didn't really need to rename yet, this is going to be my back suspension. Again, I'm just using the letter B for simplifying. The back suspension group. The middle one is going to be front, again, F, suspension group. And then the top one, I'll rename it as that car body group, because because that's the main one. So with this, since I have 3 groups, it now means I have 3 pivots. So the car body, again, that's going to be just the default regular movement, up and down. Front suspension is going to have it look like it's rotating. So I need to change this pivot. Because if I look at the pivot right now, that's not going to be doing very much. The whole car moves. So for my front suspension group, I'm going to move the pivot, align it with the car, and put it in between the 2 front wheels. Going to do the same thing for the back group, align it with the bottom of the car, in between the 2 back wheels. So front suspension, pivot is in between the front wheels, back suspension between the back wheels. And just for good measure, for that car body group, I know it's already centered based on the grouping, but I'm just going to align it with the bottom of the car. Okay, so again, just so you can see the pivots, the car body group, pivot is at the base of the car, front suspension between the front wheels, centered, back suspension, centered between the back wheels. So visually, now that I have those pivots, I can now rock my car from the back and rock my car from the front. So again, what we're going to use is we're going to use this control, so when the control comes down, it's going to create that rocking motion. Now, I can't do that with a constraint based off of this different motion that it's doing. This is actually going to be using an expression. So an expression is very similar to constraints. It's even closer to set-driven keys that we did in other tutorials, that we are connecting 2 attributes together and having, when you move one attribute, it alters and affects something else. So to get to your expressions, you can start with what is actually being controlled. Again, think of what you are looking at actually having animated based on your movement. So in the idea of the car, again, I want the geometry is what is being affected. So I am selecting my front suspension group. Again, the group itself. And I'm going to be looking at the rotation. So I'm going to select my rotate X, because again, that is the direction based on how my car is facing. And then in the channel box on the right, I'm going up to its edit menu, and the very first section, expressions. So expression editor is the base level of scripting that we are going to write out an expression of when I have my front suspension's rotation is going to be connected to my controller. Now the expression editor does have nice little ways to help you out. That in the second kind of section down here where it says selected object and attribute, it has everything written out of what you just selected. So you can copy and paste this information down to the editor on the bottom. Now the only thing you have to be very careful with expression editors, and whenever you're writing one, is spelling, and even capitalization is incredibly important. If you don't spell it exactly the way you did before, this is not going to work. And it will tell you, it will give you an error down here in the script editor that it can't find what you're writing because it doesn't match. So the first one we just copy and paste, make it nice and easy. The second half you have to actually type out, so you need to make sure again that you name them correctly. So with an expression, you have what is being controlled selected first, and then I'm just going to use space just so it can be seen easier on the screen. So space, using the equal button, again equal next to the backspace, space, and it is going to equal my control. Now the thing that's a little bit tricky and some people might find confusing is my front suspension grouping is actually going to be connected to the back control. And this is just based on the rotation of what the rotation is doing. So whatever you name this control, don't click on it or the work you just did will actually disappear. So that's why I'm using my outliner. But whatever you named it, so I named it again B underscore suspension underscore control, that's what you need to type down here. And again, look at what you did capital, look at what is lowercase, it has to be exactly the same. So it's front suspension group, period, rotate X, equals back suspension control, period. And again, looking at how my control is made, I'm going to be using my translate Y movement. So after the period, I'm going to type translate Y. The Y does have to be capital. Anytime you're using attribute expressions, even just look at what's up here. The actual axis is capital. And then, oh, I didn't name it, I'm sorry. Up here at the expression name window, since we're going to be working with these for both of them, we do want to name this expression. So this is my suspension, car suspension. Okay. So again, at the bottom, just to repeat, my front suspension group dot rotate x equals my back suspension control dot translate y. And I'm going to create. Now again, if you typed something wrong, an error would show up down here in the script editor telling you it can't find something. If you didn't get an error, which is hopefully, what you should see, if your geometry is still selected, well, the group, I should say, is still selected, you'll see purple over here in the channel box on the right. Purple is a good sign. Those are our expressions. And now when I move my controller, again, moving it up and down the translate Y, because that's what I typed, it's now rotating the suspension for me. So it now looks like the back of the car is being pushed down. So again, I use that back control based on the rotation. Dun, 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 dun. Okay. So that's the back. So we need to repeat this for the front. Now what's great with the idea of the expression is we can reuse the one we made to help us. So in my expression editor, since I clicked on something else, that work disappeared. It's saved. It's just you have something else selected, so you can't see it. So in the expression editor, if I go to select filter, I can click on by expression name. Again, it might look like it's already on, but just click on it anyway. And it's going to bring up all the expressions you have already made. So I can click on suspension, and there's the work that I did before. So I'm going to add to this and do the front one right below it. Now, the idea of expressions, this is based off scripting. So if you know scripting, this is probably really easy for you. But if you haven't ever done with scripting, this right now equals one line. Since I'm now going to be adding in a second line, before I can do that, I have to use a semicolon. Semicolon breaks up the actual lines of script. So now I can enter. So again, if you hit enter without that semicolon, it would think it's still one piece and it wouldn't actually work. So as I mentioned, we can use this expression editor to help us. We're going to be writing the same line, it's just for the opposite directions, the opposite front and back. So I'm going to actually just copy this whole line of the expression and paste it below, and I'm going to switch my letters. Since I already did my front suspension group, I'm now doing my back suspension group. Since I already did this back suspension control, I'm now doing the front control. Now, you're not hitting create anymore because you already created one. You're editing now. So just hit on edit. Again, hopefully nothing shows up for you on the bottom. And now when I move that front control down, it rotates. Now, it's working, but based on just what is going to look a little bit more visually pleasing, when you move the arrow down, you'd think the car would move down. This is based on the origin, the axis of where everything is located. When I'm moving it down, the car's actually rotating up. I want it to rotate down. So there's a real easy fix for this. In the expression editor, again, the second line, because that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the back grouping. We want it to rotate the opposite direction. We're going to tell it to equal the same thing here, front suspension control, but I'm going to put in a minus sign, again, the negative front suspension control. And edit. And now when I move it up and down, now it looks like it's pushing down on the car. Much better. Yay for expressions. Alright, something I always like to say with expressions, if you made an expression and it's working, save your work. You don't want something to go wrong and then find out that it's gone, or you lose your file. So please save your work after you've made a successful expression. So our little side ones are done. So now we're going to look at the main one, the one in the middle. So again, this is looking at the top group, that car body group. When I move this, I want the whole thing to move. So this one is going back to constraints. So I'm going to select my car body group. We're looking at constraints. I'm selecting the control first. So I'm selecting my main suspension control, the centered one. Then in the outliner, control select the car body group. And I'm going to go up to my constraint menu and open up the options for point constraint. Again, maintain offset is still on. This time I'm going to do all 3 axes and add it. Okay, now when I move it, my whole body will move. Again, same when I go left and right in those other directions. I want to apply orientation, rotation as well. So same selection, having the control selected in the outliner, control select car body group, constrain, open options for orient constraint. And maintain offset is on, and I'm going to apply to all 3 axes, and I'm going to add. So now when I rotate my car, rotate my control, car rotates. Rotate control, car rotates. Currently though, if you rotate on your Y, you're going to see your doors aren't following yet. That's okay. We are going to fix that in just a second. Again, they're not following because they are still constrained to the door handle, that control you made before. But right now it's working. This is really good. So we just need to do some parenting to fix that. So select your 2 door controls, because you can do this at the same time, and you're going to parent it to the main suspension. Just regular P for parent. So now when I rotate, my doors stay closed. Again, tires are still in place, but that's separate. We can't control that. And honestly, you wouldn't be doing a big motion right there anyway. That would just be really little rotation. So I'm going to also parent my other 2 suspension controls. Okay, grab the 2 arrows, select the one in the middle, P for parent. So that way, they now stay with it as well. If I rotate it on the nice axis, come on computer. There we go. Okay, I'm getting on all 3. I don't know why it's happening to all 3 here. We'll just do this way. So they're going to rotate with it. There we go. But again, they still have their individual movements. So the top of the body of your car is done. The bottom is done. We need the middle. That is what this large circle is, the root control. So this root control, just like you would have for a character kind of around their waist to move their whole torso forward, that's what we're using for the car. So the root control I have kind of just centered on the car, really nice, easy place to grab it. It's not in the way of my tires for it. Again, it's centered to the just car itself. Just that was a regular center pivot. And thinking just like you would do with a biped, I'm going to start parenting to this. So for the top half of the car, that main suspension control was the top parent. So I'm going to parent it to the root. And then along the bottom, those front and back controls were already controlling the tires. So for my front tire control, parent it to the root. Back tire control, parent it to the root. So we can move forward. Now, right now, your tires are left on their own. That's all right. We just need to add something in to fix that. Because right now, what is moving is actually constraints moving. So we need to add another one that's going to include those tires for us. And then we'll write an expression, so when it moves, the tires not only move forward, but they will actually rotate with the car. So this is going to be a constraint. So I have my root control selected. I'm going to select my car geometry group, that very first group, the group that has the 4 tire groups and the car body group. Okay, it's the top of them. If you don't have one of these, make one. Group all of those tire groups and the car body group together. So again, root control, car geometry group. And this is going to be a parent constraint because I want it to control the movement, the actual translation, and the rotation. So maintain offset is on, translate all, rotate all, add. So what happens now when I move forward, my tires come forward. When I rotate, my whole tire rotates. Again, for animating purposes, this control, your root control, is what you're going to use to move and animate your car, to go around on a nice little drive for whatever it's doing. So it's moving forward. But again, just to make it easier on your animator so they don't have to animate the wheels, we should set it up so the wheels automatically rotate when you move the car. So that will be an expression. Now again, it's not going to be the control. The control is for just individual movement. We want this to be an automatic setup, so this is actually on the groups. We're applying this to the groups. So select one of your tire groups. Again, doesn't matter which one because you're just going to do some copy and pasting. And again, this is going to be the X rotation. Again, the rotation that it's actually going to turn the tire. So in the channel box, click on the Rotate X for the tires group. Again, very specific, the group. And edit expressions. So I'm going to name my expression first. I'm going to name it wheel rotation. I already have my tire group Rotate X selected and written for me, so I'm just going to copy and paste. And it is going to equal my root controls translation. So however you typed root control, whatever you ended up calling it, type that. So I've got root control, again, period, and this is my translate Z. Again, I know I'm using Z because that was my forward motion for my vehicle. So if your car was turned a different way, make sure you're, again, looking at whatever axis is moving the car forward. So we've got translate Z and create. Whew, no errors. Alright, so we're going to just show you how this one works and then we're going to apply to the other tires. So when I move my car forward, and actually I'm going to throw a wireframe on so you'll be able to see it a little bit better. When I move my car forward, watch this forward tire, it's going to start to rotate. Now it is a very slow rotation. It's rotating, but again, it doesn't look very realistic. Again, this is based off of the expression that you just wrote is a 1-to-1 ratio. Again, to get it back, just go to select filter by expression name. You can see suspension we made before, and now wheel rotation. But again, this one that you wrote is a 1-to-1 ratio. When my tire rotates 1 degree, it means I move my translate 1 full unit. So a lot of times when you're doing this, it's not going to look like it's fast enough. So we need to add in a little bit of math to make it look a bit better. So for this, you're going to do a multiplication, again, this being the symbol above the 8. So I'm timesing it, and then pick a value that you think is going to work to actually rotate the tire faster so it will look natural. So you can kind of start with groups, units of 5, and see how that works with it. So I do times 5, edit, so it applies it to the expression. Now when I move my root control, you can see my tire is moving faster. I'm rotating with it. Still doesn't look that natural based on how far I move the car, but it's getting closer. If I try times 10, edit. Now when I move my root control, you can see now the tire really looks like it's actually pushing the car forward. So you can play with yours. Again, it's based off of scale, it's based off how big everything is. It might not be 5 or 10, you might find 8 the value you need to apply with some different values and see what you need. So again, that's only one tire. So we're going to copy this to the other tires. Again, since I'm using multiple lines of code, adding in the semicolon at the end of it, and I'm going to copy and paste it 3 times, so that way I will have all 4 tires here. And just like before, just change your letters. So this was my left front, so I need left back tire, right front, and then right back. Again, if you wrote everything out, rewrite everything out, and edit. So when I move the car forward with my root, all 4 tires are rotating. Isn't that nice? Again, you wrote a successful expression, save that work. So your main motion and everything that you need for the car itself is done. Next stuff is really just for the outliner and for making a nice clean rig. You have a root control. Again, if you ever downloaded a character rig before, you always have a global, the global that puts the character into the scene. So again, that's what my big rectangle that I have along the bottom is. It's just a regular center pivot to the origin, and it's my global. So I'm going to parent my root control to my global control. Again, I would never animate this. This is just what I would use to put my car in the starting line. Once I've got my global control, There's something that we can add that you can actually add onto any kind of biped rig. I just didn't have it before because there was a lot of information already in those tutorials. So what we're going to add is the ability to scale your rig. And since this rig's a little bit simpler to work with, I just thought it'd be a nice place to add to show you. But again, if you've ever downloaded a character rig, you can see on the global control there's usually an attribute that allows you to scale the character. And on the global is the only place you can do this, based on how everything's connected. And what actually does that is a constraint, a scale constraint. So we apply this on the global control level. So I have my global control selected. Again, in the outliner, I'm going to select my car geometry group. Again, visually you'll see it already has translate and rotate constraints applied to it from before. So up in my constraint menu, I'm going to add the scale constraint. Again, maintain offset is on, all axes. So what this allows me to do is now when I scale my global control, my curves scale down, my geometry scale down. Again, everything is nice in proportion together. If anything wasn't in the right grouping, it wouldn't show here. You'd see something would either explode or it would stay the original size. So that's a just nice last little thing you can do for the global. So the last two things for the rig that I wanted to show are just to really clean up your outliner. Right now you should have a global control, which is all of your curves, and then a car geometry group, which is all of the geometry. Again, your geometry and your curves should remain separate. They should not have any curves in the geo. There should not be any geo in with the curves. They are both separate, and that's really how that scale constraint works. So to clean it up, I'm going to select my global control, and I'm going to just group it to itself, and I'm going to name this my car rig. Again, if you had a car name like Mustang, say Mustang rig. And this is little Aardman car, so we'll say Aardman rig. And this is just really a buffer to help clean up your hierarchy. So I'm not actually going to use anything on here. It's just to clean up the rig itself in the outliner. So in the channel box, I'm going to select all my translates and scales, even the visibility, and lock and hide them. Then I'm going to select the rig group and the geometry group, group them together, and then this is just my car name. So Aardman car. Again, think of it as the character, it's the character name. And again, this isn't actually animated, it's never used, so I'm just going to lock and hide it. It's just grouping, organizing up your outliner. So when you're done, you have one thing in the outliner. Again, think of if you downloaded a character rig. When it comes in, it's one thing. It's not 10 million all separate pieces. It's one nice item in the outliner. And then your rig's done. Isn't that nice and easy? Again, no joints, no skinning. Again, you could keep working on it. You could visually and color code your curves if you wanted to. You know, again, the idea of right red, left blue sort of things. Again, I would set up limits, and the idea of the door right now has the ability to rotate into itself. I would limit that. I would go through and lock and hide attributes that I don't need. Again, take scale off of everything else. Again, take off the translates you don't need, the rotates you don't need. Just to simplify it for your animator so they're not doing stuff that, you know, might break it. But that's a vehicle. That's a nice basic vehicle rig. Again, the idea that this guy has a face, I would work with the face. I'd make little aim constraint, orient constraints for the, no, I was right, aim constraint for the eyes, so I could animate the eyes. I would use blend shapes on the mouth to make the mouth talk, maybe make the bumper kind of smile or frown. If you had windshield wipers, I would kind of create a basic thing so they could animate up and down, like little rotation. Again, if anything happens in the back, I would add those in. Again, if you want to get really fancy, not that I don't know, I guess if your windows were going to be clear, clear glass, you could create a control for the steering wheel. But for a basic level of vehicle rigging, that's all you need. The car moves forward, the wheels rotate, I can get some nice rocking motion. That's a car. That's all it does. So, again, even if you had a more realistic car, everything that I just went through, you can apply that to it. If you have a more exaggerated car, you could use this and keep pushing it forward. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on vehicle rigging. If you have any questions or comments, please post them. Please subscribe so you can see more really great tutorials that we're going to be creating. So thank you guys so much for watching. We get so excited when we get little emails that you have a new subscriber, you have a new comment. It really makes our day. That we like to know that there are people out in the world watching these and that they're useful. So thanks a lot, everybody, and we'll see you in the next one.